Just 2 weeks left to go of the 23-24 draft season, and if you've still got some final league positions to fight for or nail down, there aren't too many more opportunities to score points. In this episode, we've got all the usual draft chat, those final big decisions of the season. Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, the podcast, website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for another Gameweek preview, going over waiver options, hidden gems and general Premier League chat ahead of Gameweek 37. Now, apologies for not getting a podcast out in Gameweek 36. It was one of my very good friends' wedding the weekend before, which I was a big part of, and I came out of that with a bit of a sore throat. And my voice was gone, which isn't really what you need as a podcaster. A few of you reached out in the DMs to go over some things for your teams. My thumbs were still very much working, so I was able to chat through some last-minute stuff with many of you anyway. This weekend just gone, I was gallivanting again in Italy, so I didn't manage to watch any of the games live. I was unfortunately kept very up to date with the Liverpool goals going in against Spurs while sat eating pasta, looking out over Lake Como with some lovely regular buzzes on my Apple Watch to lift my mood. One of the games I did manage to see bits of live was the Palace United game on Monday night, which was good fun. Elsewhere, I think the results largely went as we probably would have expected, just with some larger score lines, particularly that Chelsea result against West Ham. Now, with just 2 weeks to go, anything can happen in the waivers, and season keepers can easily find themselves thrown back into the pile. It's well worth keeping an eye on some of the players that your league rivals drop this weekend, as you may want to pick them up next week, as this week's rubbish really could be next week's gems. A side note, all of my neighbours have currently decided to go out in the garden and do some DIY work. It's just gone 7 p.m. on Wednesday evening, and there's various grass cutting, nail hammering, fence post smashing, all sorts going on. So if you hear any little taps in the background, forgive me. I've tried to set the sensitivity of the microphone low enough to not pick those up. Now, as I just said, I'm recording this episode on Wednesday the 8th of May, so any team news, injury developments or press conference info are up to date as of then, and of course subject to change. Some of the players I'll be discussing in this episode include Noni Madeki, Michael Elise, Callum Hudson-Odoi, plus a few more. So let's get straight into it. Let's kick things off with the top 100 waiver watch from last weekend. So the players that were coming in were Ortega in goal for City, Livramento, Adebayo, Chalobah, Badiashile and Tomiyasu. The players leaving were Sarabia, Timo Werner, Davies, Thiago Silva, Semenyo and Ryan Ait-Nouri. Let's have a look at the fixtures for this week and also partly to next, because that is our lot. Obvious place to start are the doubles. Man City, I think, have the best double, but you're unlikely to find any of their players in the waiver pile. Pretty much their whole starting 11 are 90+% owned in 10-team leagues. Chelsea are my second favourites, given their recent uptick in form. 2 away games against Brighton and Forest, which I think should suit them quite well. I'm expecting both teams to score in both of those games, so it's more the midfielders that appeal to me, but I wouldn't blame you for picking a defender up if you had the choice, and particularly if you can find one that's likely to start in both the games. Newcastle are next for me. They got an away trip to Old Trafford at the weekend. Given their defensive struggles, could be a very nice one for the Newcastle attacking players. But trying to predict the exact combo over the 2 games beyond the obvious could be tricky. We can't even be certain who will be starting goal or in defence, but either way, I know that a lot of their players will be popular in the waivers this week. Of the rest, we've got Brighton with a double of Chelsea and Newcastle. It's okay. Spurs have 2 home games against Burnley and City, which is essentially a single game week dressed up as a double. And Man United have 2 home games against Arsenal and Newcastle, which would usually appeal, but I'm personally not going to go anywhere near it. In terms of the single game weeks, we've got Moyes' final home game for West Ham at home to Luton. Means the expected narrative metric is coming in high for that one. I'm expecting both teams to score. Not totally convinced West Ham get 3 points though, but hopefully the fans can at least show Dave Moyes some respect for the job he's done there over the last few years. Bournemouth at home to Brentford. Brentford finishing the season with a bit of a whimper. I fancy Bournemouth to get a result in that one. So if you've got any of their attackers, you may want to consider hanging on to them, but I wouldn't go out of my way to bring in any if you don't have them. Palace away to Wolves. Now, who'd have thought a few months ago that we'd be eyeing up Palace players like they're the next best thing? After that performance against Man United, they should be firm favourites for this one, and you may want to consider rolling them for the final game at home to Aston Villa too. And Everton against Sheffield United is another fixture which I think will prove popular on the waivers this week. I expect Everton to firmly dispatch Sheffield United in this one. I fancy the clean sheet and I fancy goals, so get whatever piece of Everton you possibly can, and we'll be mentioning one or two options in the main segment. I don't think there were any particular key injuries to talk about from Gameweek 36. I think any of the key injuries had come in the preceding weeks. There's nothing new to add there. In terms of Elite Chat, I think in terms of big players that you could potentially look to trade away or consider dropping entirely, depending on how big your league is, what your appetite for risk is, I think Mo Salah is on there. I think you could definitely see who you could get in a trade deal for Mo Salah. Could you get some Chelsea players in return? Could you get some Man City players in return? Definitely one to consider trading. Odegaard, another one. Solanke. Maddison, I've already discussed in a previous one. Martinelli, I've previously discussed. And then the big Liverpool defenders too. Van Dijk, Alexander-Arnold, Robertson. I would definitely consider dropping any of those guys if you think there's something better to get on the waivers, and depending on what your appetite for risk is, there probably is someone that you might fancy on the waivers that has better fixtures than they do. In terms of the main picks, Palace defence away to Wolves, there are a few options there. Munoz is 19% owned in 10-team leagues, Klein just 3% and Richards 2%, so some hidden gem territory picks there if you want to bet the Crystal Palace defence. Wolves are hardly in free scoring form themselves, and given the form that Palace are in, it's as good a chance of a clean sheet as any, I think, this week. The other one, as I just mentioned, is Everton. Their defence playing at home against Sheffield United. Branthwaite and Tarkowski are very highly owned, but you can get Ashley Young in a lot of leagues, just 27% ownership in 10-team leagues. And also Godfrey's ownership is just outside in gem territory at 11%. The other couple of defenders to mention from some of the bigger clubs, Tomiyasu, his ownership is just 39% in 10-team leagues. Now, even with a single game week away at United, if there is a bit of the Arsenal defence free to pick up in the waiver pile, I would happily take it, and I'd happily double up if I already had the likes of Ben White, Saliba, Gabriel or Raya. The triple up may be a bit too far for me, unless you're chasing in these final two game weeks and you think that could give you a bit of an edge, then go for it, because they are firmly the best bet for a clean sheet, regardless of whether it's a single or double. I know lots of people will be trying to move in on City defenders this week if they haven't already, or if there are some available in the waivers, but given how they seem to just concede silly late goals, I'd much rather have Tomiyasu than any of the City defenders. The other one is Gusto for Chelsea. Ownership around 50% in 10-team leagues. Surprisingly, he is currently one of the easiest ways into the Chelsea defence, with surging roster percentages for Dizazi, Thiago Silva, Cucurella. I said it a couple of weeks ago that Chelsea could have eyes on 6th or even 5th place, and that means with something still to play for, they will likely play their strongest 11 for the remaining 3 games, because 5th is very much attainable for them given how the season is panning out. So could be some very modest rotation, maybe one of the defenders, maybe one of the midfielders, but on the whole I think we can reliably pick their attacking front line of Palmer, Mudryk, Mudryk and Jackson for I think all 3 of their final matches. Michael Elise is very highly owned in 10-team leagues. He's up to 76% now, but with 4 attacking returns in the last 4 games, if he was available in your league, I would definitely be looking to bring him in. Even though he's only got the single game against Wolves, I still think that's as good as a comparison against any of the double game players that you might find in the waiver pile. Equally, if someone was looking to trade or put him as part of a make weight in a trade, I would happily take him and start him for probably the final 2 games. Now, just mentioned some of that Chelsea attacking line and have to highlight Noni Mudryk. His ownership is currently 47% in 10-team leagues, and he is a player that's been a most hidden gem pick at times this season already. So that's a player owned in less than 10% of 16-team leagues, so really scraping the barrel. If you look at his ownership graph, it looks like the latest SpaceX flight plan. It really is to the moon. 6 Premier League starts in a row now, 5 attacking returns in that time. He is one of those sort of algorithm waiver picks that makes too much sense this week if he's free. Don't try and double guess or get too clever or anything. If he's there, he has to be penciled in as a move for this week. Another player to mention, not advocate for necessarily, but to mention is Dingra for Brighton. His ownership is 20% in 10-team leagues. He feels like one of those players that Brighton are fattening up, ready to sell to Chelsea for 100 million next season. A player that's threatened to really go off at times, but never really been able to put any kind of form together. He's one of the players that somehow completely escaped De Zerbi roulette. Definitely will be a popular pickup this week. I'm not saying you shouldn't get him, but he doesn't do much for me at all. And I can see him only starting one of the two games as well. No attacking return since game week 25. He is an auto waiver pickup when you're scanning through the list last minute of who to bring in. Leave him to those that haven't done their homework and those that haven't done some proper planning, and pick up some of these other players that we're discussing instead. Next is Callum Hudson-Odoi. His ownership is 19% in 10-team leagues. We've already talked about expected narrative for David Moyes' final home game for West Ham. The expected narrative for Hudson-Odoi is even higher, as it will be the first time he faces his boyhood club, Chelsea, since moving earlier in the season, and he will definitely want to prove a point. His attacking returns have predominantly come in the latter half of the season, whereas minutes have been more consistent, including 2 last week against Sheffield United. Follow this week with a game against Burnley in game week 38 on the final day, and he could be a nice little upshot waiver that will not be on many radars. He could even be a pickup that you're able to get with your second or third waiver choice, as he could be that overlooked with all the double game week treats potentially on offer, which everybody else will be going for. And finally, a forward option, and definitely somebody that would have been on the Game Week 36 pod had I got one out last week, and that is Adebayo for Luton. Ownership is 54% in 10-team leagues, a season high of 92% rostered in Game Week 25. Obviously dipped since his injury to a low of 29% a couple of weeks ago, and is now on the climb again. I expect goals from Luton in that game against West Ham. As I said, I expect both teams to score, and in their final game at home to Fulham 2, I expect goals as well. So it could be well worth a look if he happens to still be free in your league. And as I said, in 10-team leagues, for example, he's free in around half. A few hidden gems to mention. So these are all players generally available in more than 90% of leagues. Starting with Brighton defender Veltman. Ownership is 10% in 10-team leagues. A pure double game week pick for anyone that fancies Brighton to get a clean sheet against either Chelsea or Newcastle. Then a few midfielders to mention. The first one is Latif Chong for Luton. His ownership is just 3% in 10-team leagues. Really passing the eye test lately, and I wonder if some other Premier League clubs will be interested in picking him up if Luton were to go down into the Championship again next season. He hasn't returned since game week 30, but he's always involved and could be a bit of a wild card differential if you're looking to really take a few big swings before the season finishes. Another potentially big swing to take is Harrison for Everton. His ownership is just 9% in 10-team leagues. It's been a disappointing season for Harrison, given he started plenty of games. His last attacking return was way back in game week 23, but his expected goal involvement in the last 3 games adds up to 1.09. So in other words, he should have got something in the last few weeks, and he hasn't. So he could be due something this weekend in what is the easiest fixture on paper with a home game against Sheffield United. The final one, and friend of the pod, Jacob Murphy for Newcastle. Ownership just 8% in 10-team leagues. He really is Newcastle's multi-tool player. Always puts in a very, at a minimum, 6 out of 10 performance, whatever he's asked to do. He could line up, I think, in his more preferred right wing spot again this weekend. I expect he'll start one of the games and probably make a sub-appearance in the second. Expected minutes for him I've got as around 110 if I had to guess right now, which I think if you offered anyone, you would take it and you would pick him up as a waiver prospect. Then the most hidden gem picks, this is a player owned in less than 10% of 16-team leagues, is Igor for Brighton. So in the same vein as Veltman, purely doing this because it's a double fixture and there's a potential chance of a clean sheet. He started 3 of the last 4 for Brighton. You know, a good value clean sheet at the weekend against Villa in their 1-0 win on a day in which they generally kept Villa very quiet. And if they can keep Villa quiet, there is no reason why they couldn't keep the likes of Chelsea or Newcastle quiet. It's not someone I'm going to be considering, but, you know, if you just want a little piece of the action, I think Igor is as safe to start the 2 as anyone could be. Dunk is the most obvious way in, but his ownership has remained high all season long. So that is it for this episode. A reminder, the waiver deadline is at the conventional time of 11 a.m. on Friday, the 10th of May, ahead of the Saturday lunchtime kickoff between Fulham and Manchester City. The added-in games for the double game week will be carried out across Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, but fear not, because Gameweek 38 will all take place at the same time on Sunday afternoon, which means a Saturday lunchtime waiver deadline, which means even though the games will go right up until Wednesday night, we will still have a few days to plot and plan our final game week of the 23-24 season. If this is your first time watching us on YouTube, thank you for lending us your eyes and ears. It's taken you a while to get to us this season, but to be fair, we haven't been on YouTube very long. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up if you like the draft chat that we bring. You'll be able to stay up to date then of all the new videos as they come out across the final week of the season, some post-season analysis in the coming weeks, and then everything we've got throughout the summer to plan ahead of the 24-25 season. And for those of you that haven't checked out draftfc.co.uk before, now is the perfect time to do it for one reason and one reason only, which is the draft history feature. So that means if you log in and sign up now with your team ID, you will be able to save all of your draft league data from this season for many years to come to look back on at your leisure. So that's all the league analytics, all the moves that have been made, how points were scored, week-by-week projections, head-to-head matchups will be saved there, logged permanently in your Draft FC user database. Now, if you don't do that before the game resets in the summer, that data is gone forever. We get occasional messages from people asking us if we're able to fish out data from last season, the season before, and the answer, unfortunately, is no, because once the game updates, that data is gone. We hold lots of general data on trends within the game itself, but the amount of storage space it would take to save that individual intricate data for every single draft league is far too much, even for us. So if you want to take advantage of that, and if you're in a very engaged league that likes to keep that data to hand, just make sure you're signed up, even shortly after Game Week 38 if you need to. As long as you're signed up before the game ticks over into the kind of admin phase before next season, then you'll be able to take advantage of that feature. Given where we're at in the season, given potentially the high stakes on the line, and I know lots of you are going to have individual dilemmas and circumstances in your leagues which we simply couldn't cover in a podcast aimed at the masses. So as always, of course, if you have particular things you're weighing up or particular decisions you need to make for your draft leagues, then the inbox is always open. The best place is on X. If you give us a follow at draft_FC, send me a message on there and I will reply to all direct messages before the deadline. Equally, if you are watching or listening on YouTube, if you comment below, then again, I will respond to all of those questions before the deadline. Also got some people DMing me on Reddit and things. That's probably a little bit more precarious. I don't always check those messages. So X or Twitter, or if you comment on the YouTube feed below, the guaranteed way really to get a response from me before the deadline on Friday. So best of luck ahead of the penultimate waiver window of the season, the penultimate game week. Be bold with your moves, be bold with the trade offers. Really, nobody is undroppable at this stage of the season, so do what you have to do. As I said, the inbox is open if you want to run anything by me, and until next time, stay shook.